Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Morning Devotion. It's good to be here with you this morning, and thank you all for tuning in. I hope that this word encourages you, maybe gives you some perspective. I probably could safely say we are not unfamiliar with trials, tribulations, sufferings, heartache, hardships. But I think that we can be unfamiliar with the purpose of those things at times. I know from personal experience and from conversations over the years with people who are really going through things, that oftentimes trials and tribulations kind of change their perspective on who God is, and not for the better. Oftentimes we can almost feel like, well, God isn't who he said he was because I'm in pain, because I'm suffering, because I've had to go through things that are unbelievable. But I don't think that's the purpose of trials, is to make us doubt who God is. I actually think it's the opposite. I think the reason we go through things is to help our perspective, to help our understanding of who God actually is. And that trials and sufferings and heartaches and hardships, they actually validate who God is and who he says he is. And I know that we can get caught up in hearing. We hear the stories, we hear the Bible stories, we hear the testimonies of others. But sometimes we've got to go beyond just hearing and actually experiencing and seeing God. And that seeing and that experiencing takes place most times when we go through something that isn't pleasant. It's through those unpleasant things that we begin to actually see, whoa, God really is who I've heard him to be. And so I wanted to take a few moments to look at a man named Job. We're probably all familiar with him to some extent. But I feel like he makes a statement that we'll talk about that really gives us perspective into our sufferings and our trials, and maybe what that purpose is. And so we're going to read Job 42, verses 5-6, and this is the NIV, and it reads this: My ears have heard of you. My ears had heard of you. Previously, I had heard about you, stories, retellings, maybe from his parents, maybe from his ancestors. I had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. And this is a statement that occurs right near the end of all of Job's sufferings, and after he has had a real encounter with God, and he's in awe. I had heard about you, but after all of these things, now I have seen you. And it changed his life, and it changed his perspective. It brought dimension to his relationship with God, and that came through trials and tribulations. This revelation, going from, well, I'm hearing about you, to I've experienced you, I see you, you are actually who you say you are, came through suffering. And most of us probably aren't happy with hearing that, but suffering has a purpose. Scripture makes it very clear that Job is upright, blameless. God himself validates that when he calls Satan to him and is like, hey, have you considered Job? He's upright, he's blameless, he runs away from sin and evil, he is just awesome. You should probably go ahead and put your hands on him and see what happens. He was a good man. And I think that also, in fact, God says there was nobody like him on the whole earth. Nobody like Job. At that point in time, Job was unique in his relationship with God. He was unique in the way that he ordered his life, and God gives him high praise for the way that he lives his life. He states that Job is blameless, upright, fears God, shuns evil. There's no one like him on the earth. And if God was saying that, it's because it was true, 100% true. And he was unique in his approach to God, and the way that he ordered his life. He feared God to the extent that he was offering sacrifices on behalf of his children just in case they had cursed God secretly in their heart. He was perfect in the sense that he was morally and ethically pure. He was upright, righteous, he was straight, and he was level. There was no perversity to be found in him. Job feared and revered God. Sin wasn't welcome in his home. Sin wasn't welcomed in his heart. He departed from anything that was evil. He ran away from anything that was evil, and God was pleased with him. And this is an outstanding and respectable man. Job was outstanding according to the words of God. Okay? Job respected God, and God respected Job. And this here goes to show that suffering does not discriminate. Suffering is not prejudiced. It does not matter if you're the most righteous, the least righteous, the Christian, the non-believer. It doesn't matter if you're rich or you're poor. Suffering touches everyone. Everyone. But it's what we do with that suffering. It's what we learn through those trials that makes the difference. It's our perspective on it. In verse 1, we are introduced to virtuous Job. In verse 8, God validates Job's character with his own words. So it might seem a little perplexing that God literally offers Job up to be terrifyingly tried by Satan. Now, Satan, of course, is delighted by this because he's just positive. He is just sure that Job is going to curse God to his face when his life starts falling apart. So 13 verses into the book of Job, and that's exactly what begins to happen. Job's life falls apart. Job's life becomes shambles. Job's life becomes crumbled stones, and everything is torn apart and ripped apart. And one day, everything that Job has worked for, all of his livelihood, everything that he loved the most was taken away, gruesomely. Job received messages of calamity in rapid succession. First, the Sabeans steal Job's oxen and donkeys and proceed to kill his servants with the sword. Then, fire falls from heaven, apparently from God, and consumed his sheep and the servants over the sheep. Then it's reported that the Chaldeans swept in and took his camels and killed his servants with the edge of the sword. One day, one thing after the other. The final blow of that day was the message that all of his sons and daughters had been killed when the house they were feasting in collapsed in on them. After Job failed to curse God after these tragic and painful events, Satan smites his body with multiple physical ailments, sore boils, from the top of his head to the soles of his feet. He is plagued by nightmares. He is plagued with peeling skin and disfigurement and halitosis, which was probably brought on by depression, emaciation, which is extreme thinness and weakness. There was nothing much to him anymore. There was no weight, fever, and never-ending pain. In his physical pain, he began to scrape away the boils as he sat in ashes. His wife sees this whole thing taking place, and she tells him it's probably better if you just curse God and die. His friends come to see him in his affliction and only add to his pain. He was not comforted by those who should have comforted him. He was not encouraged by those who should have encouraged him. He was not defended by those who should have defended him. His character is run through the mud by his own friends. His friends declare that he is wicked and sinful, and even say that his punishment is not severe enough. To say that Job went through some things is a huge understatement. To say Job has some trials, it doesn't fully depict what he actually endured. It was painful. It was beyond expression what he had to endure. I don't even know how long he had to endure those things. And yet God allowed it. And the question is always, why? Why? Why would God allow that to happen to a good man on top of it all? And perhaps some of us, some of you watching this are experiencing great pain. And I have heard some things of some things that people are enduring right now, and my mind is blown. Things I've never experienced, things I wish I will never have to experience. And my mind is absolutely blown at what some of you are facing right now. Never ending sadness and never changing circumstances, and it can be so frustrating, and it's bad report after bad report, and pain added onto pain, and sorrow added onto your sorrow, and it feels like we can barely breathe. It feels like we're being suffocated by all of these trials and all of these tribulations, and you're sitting and we're sitting and I'm sitting in ashes, and we're scraping our boils, and there's no relief, and we look pitiful, and we've got no comfort from friends, and loved ones have walked away from you, they've walked away from me, they've walked away from us. People who should have supported us, they're not there, and it's confusing, and it's dark, and it's painful, and there's no way there can be purpose for what we're feeling. There's no way there can be purpose for what we're suffering. Well, that's what we think. None of it makes sense. None of it makes sense. But there was something that occurred because of Job's suffering. It seems unlikely, but all of the unfortunate, painful, sorrowful experiences and circumstances that he had to endure were leading up to a greater revelation. A greater revelation. Up until his suffering, Job had only heard about God. And I like what he did with what he heard. He was faithful. There was no one like him on the earth, but he had only heard about God. But hearing God was not sufficient. Just hearing about him wasn't enough. It was time for Job to enter into a new dimension in his relationship with the God he had been faithful to. It was time for his eyes to be open to who God was in a way he had never experienced before, and that can only come through the pain. It was a time for Job to experience God in a brand new, life-altering way. It was time for Job's perception of who God was not only to be shaped by stories of old, but by a real close-up encounter with God. And his suffering set the stage for that to occur. Now, God did eventually step in and remove Satan's hand off of Job's life. That happened. Okay, it will happen. God will step in. He did step in and defend his servant. He did eventually step in and restore everything that had been taken from Job. God did eventually say, okay, it's enough. We're done now. I'm going to release him. But God's purpose wasn't simply to allow everything to be taken, just to give it all back. If that was the only purpose for Job's suffering, I feel like that would be senseless. I'm just going to let everything be taken away just so I can show I can give it all back. That seems senseless and purposeless, and that doesn't seem like something God would do. After God comes and speaks in the whirlwind, Job makes this powerful declaration. So Job is suffering, but then God shows up, and God starts speaking, and God starts challenging, and God starts revealing, and it's awesome. And Job makes this powerful declaration after his encounter with God. Then Job answered the Lord and said, I know that you can do everything, and that no purpose of yours can be withheld from you. So God had a purpose in the suffering, and it wasn't going to be withheld. You asked, who is this who hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore I have uttered what I did not understand. Before this encounter, there were things I didn't understand. But he's saying, now I have knowledge. Now I have more understanding. Things too wonderful for me, which I did not know before, but now I've experienced it. Listen, please, and let me speak. You said, I will question you, and you shall answer me. I have heard you by the hearing of the ear. He said, I've heard you by hearing of my ear. But now my eyes see you. Job went through some things, and I'm not trying to diminish the things that we're going through. And like I told you, I've heard some things, and I'm like, that's unbelievable what some of you are going through. But what Job went through is almost mind-blowing. I don't know how he did it. But he makes it very clear. There were things I didn't understand before this, but now I understand. There were things I thought I knew, but I really didn't. But now I do know. I had heard about you, but now I have seen you. And his life was altered and it was changed. And his relationship with God was brought to this brand new dimension because of his suffering. And that seems like, you might think, well, that doesn't make any sense. It does make a lot of sense, because we say a lot of things about God. We've heard a lot of things about God. We've read a lot of things about God. We say, well, God is light. Jesus is the light. And he is. But how do we know he's the light until we are facing great darkness? Right? We say things like, Jesus is the healer. Correct. We hear that all the time. But how do we know that he is the healer until we've faced pain, sickness, or disease? It is through our trials that we go from hearing to seeing. We say, we hear, well, God is a deliverer. Sure he is. But that doesn't become true in our lives until we face something that we need to be delivered from, until there are some chains. We say he's a chain breaker. That's great. But we don't know personally that he's a chain breaker until we've got some chains and some things that he needs to release in our life. We say he is strong and we say he's our strength, but we really can't experience his strength until we are weak. Right? These are uncomfortable positions that we need to be in order to see who God really is. And so, yeah, we are facing some dark things, and we are facing some painful things, and we are facing some bondage, and we're facing hurt. But it's through those things that we can see who he really is, that we can begin to see and experience him, that yes, he is a healer. Yes, he is strong. Yes, he is our hope. I know he's my hope because I've been hopeless and he gave me hope. And yes, he is our healer. Yes, he is our chain breaker. Yes, he is a way when there is no way. And we only know those things when we face hardships. It is through our hardships that we see who he really is. And Job didn't despise it. God took care of him, but he didn't despise what he went through. He said, whoa, I've learned some things. Whoa, I've just experienced God in a way that I've never experienced him before. And it was through all the awful things that he had to go through. So yes, will God bring you victory? Yes. Will God change your circumstance? I absolutely believe it. Will you feel the way you feel forever? No, I don't. But we need to make sure that we are getting what we need to get out of our tests and our trials. When we come out, do we view God differently? Are we viewing God more correctly? Are we really experiencing and seeing who he is? But now I see you. But now I see you. Don't waste the pain. Don't waste the suffering. Learn from it. Get whatever it is that you need to get. Experience God in a way that you've never experienced him before. Yes, you will come out on the other side. And when you do, because you will, I hope you come out with fresh understanding, a fresh knowledge, and a fresh experience with your God. I'm praying for you all. I love you all. God has got you. He's stretching us. He is growing us. He is challenging us in ways that maybe make us uncomfortable and we don't understand, but he has got a greater purpose, something greater than we can ever imagine. Just keep holding on to him during the process. He's got you. Be blessed in Jesus' name.